The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. G'day to all you lovely people and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kathy and today I want to talk about The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. I think that if you are a fan of fantasy, you most likely have heard of The Wheel of Time. It is famous, infamous. It is also extremely popular. It is not a series for the faint-hearted, definitely not. There are 14 books in all, with a prequel as well. And the first book in the series is this, The Eye of the World. As you can see, it is not a small book, and in fact, I think it is one of the slimmest of the 14 books. Like I said, this is not a series for the faint-hearted. You will need to invest a lot of time to get through this series. Is it worth it? Definitely. 100%. I cannot sing its praises enough. I have read a large amount of fantasy, I think, over the years, and The Wheel of Time is my absolute favourite, by far and away. Or I should say, equal favourite with another fantasy series which is quite different. However, I recognise that not everyone will like a series like this for various reasons. Before I tell you more about the series, I wanted to share with you my journey with The Wheel of Time, which spans 30 years, probably longer than some of you have been alive. Okay. I was not a fan of fantasy until I was an adult, and I started reading it in 92, 93. I think I had read David Eddings and Raymond Feist, and I was champing for more. I was in a bookshop in the city in Melbourne, searching for something, and back then there was not a lot of fantasy. We only had a few shelves of it, I think. There was another fantasy lover there who recommended The Wheel of Time to me. I am eternally grateful to that person because The Wheel of Time became my favourite fantasy series. I think at that point only 2, perhaps 3 books had been published, and from the very beginning I fell in love with this world. I fell in love with the characters, the story. Back then, Jordan wasn't sure if he was going to finish the series in 4 or 6 books, then it became 8, then it became 10, and eventually it ended up being 14 books. So we would have to wait. After each book, we would have to wait a year or 2 years for the next book. And quite often, I would reread the previous books when a new one was published. So I don't know how often I have read several of these books, but not all of them. And then we got to the 12th book. Robert Jordan actually got very sick and he knew that he wasn't likely to finish the series. So he wrote copious notes, even scenes finalizing the series. And Brandon Sanderson, who is very popular, I know, actually wrote the last 3 books. I had read up to book 12. But would you believe I never finished the series, even though it is my favourite series? There were several reasons for that. One was because of certain things that had happened in my personal life. The major reason though was that I had just had enough of fantasy. I had read far too much of it and I was sick of it. And I had no interest in fantasy at all at that point. This was about 10 years ago. But I actually think perhaps the main reason was I didn't want to finish. I didn't want to end this journey. I loved these characters and this world so much that I didn't want it to end. So there I am, 12 books in, and I never read the final 2. It bothered me though that I never ended this series. considering it is my favourite, I thought I have to finish it. I have to know how it ends. However, so much time had passed that I knew I would have to reread the entire series, and I just couldn't bring myself to. Every now and again, though, I would feel guilty and I would take out The Eye of the World and I'd read 100 pages, maybe 2, and I'd think, no, I just can't. I can't bear to read this whole series just now. So I would put it down again. I can't tell you how many times that happened. But this year, the beginning of the year, I think, several of my subscribers asked me to talk about my favourite fantasy authors, which I will confess reignited my passion for fantasy. Perhaps I needed that break in between to enjoy fantasy again. And I decided that's it. I have to finish The Wheel of Time, so I started it again. Especially when I found out that they were making the series into a TV show. I thought there is no way I'm going to watch this without having read all the books. And I finished it. Finally, after 30 years, I have finished The Wheel of Time. Yeah, it took me long enough, didn't it? Was I disappointed? Hell no, no. This was everything and more that I had hoped. It was so satisfying, but it completely wrecked me. Yeah, I was so emotional reading the final book in particular. I was yelling, I was crying, I was sobbing, I was laughing. There was just so much happening to these beloved characters that I had known for such a long time that I felt like I had been through the emotional ringer. I think I was even depressed that it was over, that my journey was over. I just feel like this huge part of my life is finished with. I felt like a limp ragdoll at the end. I was so emotionally wrung out that it took me days to get over it. Yeah, that does not happen often with a series, whether it is books or TV or films. It happens rarely. And to me, that is a sign of something special, really special. I know that this series is very popular, and I know that there is a huge fandom out there. I know that there are message boards. I know that there are forums. Hell, even I was part of message boards back in the 90s regarding The Wheel of Time. It is deservedly a very popular series because it is special in so many ways. I honestly did not intend to talk about it just yet. I wanted to talk about The Wheel of Time towards the end of this series of videos I was doing about fantasy authors. But after finishing it and feeling so emotional about it, I felt the need to share with you guys and perhaps convince some of you to try The Wheel of Time if you haven't read it. I'm going to tell you now briefly what the series is about. The story involves a prophecy. The dragon, a character who lived hundreds of years ago, who had magical abilities, was forced to shut the Dark One in his prison together with the Forsaken, a group of very powerful magicians. And it was foretold that the dragon would be reborn and that he would be forced to unite the land to fight the Dark One and his supporters at the last battle. In the past, both males and females could wield magic. However, in the present day that this series takes place, men cannot wield magic without going insane. And because the Dragon Reborn is a male, there is always that fear that he will go insane. This series is not just about the Dragon Reborn. He is not just able to win this battle on his own. It is through all of his allies. It is through all of these other characters who we get to know intimately in this series. If I make it sound simple, it is anything but. Seriously, there are so many different kingdoms in this land who do not get along, who are sometimes in conflict, and the dragon is meant to bind all these people together so that they can fight the Dark One at this major final battle. I've been thinking how to do this actually. Should I tell you all the reasons why I think you should read this series, or should I address a lot of the criticisms I've seen leveled at it? And I think I'm going to start with the criticisms. Despite the fact that I consider this the best fantasy I have ever read, Tolkien doesn't even come close in my opinion, I am not blind to its faults. It does have several, there is no doubt about it. Some of the criticisms that are leveled at it are deserved. Some I feel perhaps not. You guys can decide if you read the series or you have read the series. A common criticism is that the series is too long. 14 books. This size. Yeah, it's a lot. No doubts about it. 14 books. Roughly, I think this one is 600 to 700. The final book is 900 pages. It's very long. Now, arguing that it's just too long, I don't think that is a legitimate criticism. Being long in itself is not a bad thing, depending upon the quality of the writing and the content of each book. Having said that, I do feel that some of the books were not necessary. After I started The Wheel of Time this year, I read 9 books and then I took a short break. And I then started book 10, Crossroads at Twilight, I think. I hated it. I will confess I did. It was so hard to get through that book. It was extremely boring. I disliked so many things about it. I was not engaged at all. And if I didn't know that the next book was a lot better, I might have been tempted to abandon the series there. But it wasn't the first time I had read Crossroads at Twilight, and I knew that the series would improve. In my opinion, the important things that did happen in book 10 could have been spread out in others. I don't feel it added all that much, if anything, to the series. Plus, it didn't even have a major climax at the end of the book, which is unusual for most of this series. But I agree, that one we could have done without. Now, many people do accuse the series of having a slog of several books that they feel were not necessary. I actually don't agree with that though. Yes, perhaps some of them could have been shortened, but every book does add something, except perhaps Crossroads at Twilight. I feel though every book has a contribution to the overall story or to the development of a character. But I can understand some people finding several of the books slow. Another criticism I have read about, which I think is also accurate, is that it can be repetitive, that the author does a lot of recaps. You have to keep in mind, however, that there was a gap of a year or two between publication dates. My feeling was always that the author was refreshing our memory of things that had occurred in previous books. In relation to the recaps anyway, other repetitions that you see are things like crossing the arms or tugging the braid. I actually like the tugging the braid. I know not everyone else does, but I liked it. I knew immediately what it referred to, which character it referred to, and I enjoyed it. I also thought it was meant to be funny, but I can understand people thinking, no, I don't need to hear that. I already know that she tugs her braid all the time, or that they cross their arms, or whatever the hell it is. I can agree that yes, there is some repetition. Do I think it is excessive? Perhaps a few times here and there, but not enough to make the books less enjoyable for that. You can always skip those recaps if you want. I think you could do that easily without really missing all that much. Another criticism I've heard is that there is a cast of thousands and it is hard to keep track of them all. That one I agree with. That is not to say that I don't love how many characters are in this series. It makes it so much richer to see different perspectives. However, it can be really hard to keep track of them, particularly very minor characters that the author will refer to as if we know them. And I'm like, I have no idea who this person is. That can sometimes be a little annoying. Now, something I don't like about this series is how the women are portrayed. Most of the women, if not all of them, treat the men in the series as if they are stupid, have no idea, couldn't even dress themselves without a woman to tell them. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that is how I often see the women in this series. Now, I have seen, I think it was Murphy Napier, say in a video that she thought Jordan was trying to change the dynamic of male and female relationships and make the females more dominant in this series. It was an interesting idea and I thought about it, but I've come to the conclusion that I don't agree with it. If some of the women, 1, 2, 5 or 10 even, had that attitude towards men, I might have been prepared to accept that. But I think it's every single woman in this series treats men like idiots. It bothers me no end because it's not accurate. We're all different. We're not all the same. Not all women are the same. And I find it offensive that all women are portrayed like this. In that regard only, I mean. Back in the 90s, because I got my brother hooked on this series, didn't I? I remember saying to him, you know what? I think Jordan must be a henpecked husband. Wow, that is so wrong of me, but I wondered, how could he possibly think all women are like this? Although I do admire some of the characters and love them deeply, which I do, that aspect of their characters bothers me. It is not realistic. There is also a relationship between 3 women and a man, and that is all I'm going to say, and that always bothered me as well. Yeah, I will say that. It does bother me. So that is a few of the criticisms of the series. Now I wanted to talk about why I think this is the best fantasy series that I've read anyway. Where do I start? What sets the Wheel of Time apart is the world that this series takes place in. It is so rich in detail, in customs, in culture, even down to the clothing that different people wear in different kingdoms in this world. When you read this series, you become so immersed that you are able to recognize where a character comes from just by the way they are dressed. That is because this world is so well drawn. And then there is the magical system. Honestly, it is one of the most detailed that I have read about. Again, that is to be expected. This is a 14-book series. The author has had plenty of time to make this magical system detailed. It is also different to so many other magical systems that I've read about. It feels almost like you can see the individual flows of the magic that the person is wielding. You immediately know what the author is referring to when he describes the magic. There is also a very rich history to this world that we learn so much about throughout the series, which I think enhances the story because it is our history that shapes our world, that shapes our societies, and is so important to understanding how we have reached a certain point in our lives. And then of course there are the characters. So many characters that you will learn to love or hate. Sometimes both at the same time. It is a 14-book series, and though you may not like a long series, what it does is provide an opportunity for the author to explore characters intimately, deeply, over a span of years. It allows us to learn so much more about characters that you may not be able to learn in a shorter series of books. None of the characters are without flaws. They're all flawed. I think that is what makes this so good, is that we may start off with a character that you despise, but over the course of the books, you will see them changing and you will find things to admire in them. Sometimes the reverse happens. You might have a character you love who by the end you don't. And this isn't a story just about one person, the Dragon Reborn. It is about at least 10, 20 major characters. And lastly, I wanted to say that having finally finished this series, I can say unreservedly that the ending was deeply satisfying. I was not disappointed. Were there a few things that I would have liked to have been different? Yes, I won't deny it, but it is not a series that leaves you feeling cheated. The payoff was worth it. That's what I felt. Did I want more? I always do. That's the thing with a series like this. I became so engrossed in it that I would go to sleep thinking about it. I would dream about it. I would wake up thinking about it. All I could think about was these characters and this world, and it was like I was living in this world with these characters. That doesn't happen very often, where you become so embroiled in this world that you almost forget that it's not real. But that happened to me. I cried over some of these characters like they were my best friends. And I think some of them almost were. It is a series that will engage your emotions, regardless of who you are. You may not like everyone, but you will find some characters to love. I have recommended this to several people in my everyday life. My brother, I know, loves this series as much as I do. No surprise, we have very similar tastes. But everyone I know who has read The Wheel of Time has not been disappointed. Now, I am not going to say that if you are a true fan of fantasy, you should read this series. No, definitely not. I think, though, that if you love fantasy, high fantasy in particular, if you like beautiful descriptive prose, though sometimes a bit flowery, if you really love long epic series where you can get to know this world and characters almost as well as you know your own, if you love great magical systems and great richly drawn worlds, then I think you will definitely like The Wheel of Time. I cannot recommend The Wheel of Time enough. As I've said, this is my favorite fantasy series. Equal favorite with one other, which I'm not going to tell you today, but it is definitely worth reading. So how do I score The Wheel of Time? I'm not going to score the individual books, but the entire series. I score out of 10. And I don't give anything a 10 because I think 10 is perfection and that does not exist. But I'm not sure what to give this. I'm going to give it 9.5 out of 10. And I think that reflects just how much I adore this series. It probably deserves 9 because there are a few flaws in the series, but given how much I love it, how much joy it has given me over the last 30 years, I'm going to stick with 9.5. Now, I have been considering doing perhaps a series of videos on certain aspects regarding the Wheel of Time. I was initially going to review each individual book, but there are so many videos out there already. I know that The Wheel of Time has a huge fandom. But I'd like to talk about a couple of things regarding the series. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing something like that. And also let me know if you have read The Wheel of Time and what your thoughts are on it. You know, I always want to hear your opinions. Thank you also very much for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you can do the usual. You can like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and I will see you next time. Bye. However,